Hello gang, today is Monday. It's the last Monday in April 2025, let's call it that. Want to give you a quick update. I mean, wheat market was moving pretty fast today on the downside. And, continues to defy anything of any logic, especially when we've got some dry weather pockets showing up in Europe, the Black Sea. There's still pockets in the U.S. They have had some rain that certainly added some bushels, but there's some pockets that didn't get any, and calendars flipping to May here this week. So, but there's a macro trader that publishes a wire, and I read that frequently. And today he happened to talk about wheat, which he never does, and I found it pretty fascinating what he talked about, and it ties up a lot of loose ends. It makes sense. It at least from my perspective, it makes sense on what we've been seeing the last couple of years. So I'm gonna publish that for you guys. I'll put that out there so you guys can read it as well and follow along. And I'll try to summarize it here, but and I'll post some weather maps so you can see what everybody's got and whatnot. But so his general thesis today was that the selling we've seen in this wheat market has not been supply-driven selling. It has not been based on the normal factors that we typically trade in our grain markets. He says it's been mostly institutional selling, and this is not the hedge funds, this is not the index funds, this is not a position that is tracked by the commitment of traders. And if you recall, if you've been with me for a while, 4 or 5 years ago I quit following the commitment of traders. I used to publish it every week, and I'll highlight it once in a while if the position gets extreme like it is now, but if it's anywhere neutral, I just ignore it. But what happened is, like I say, that there's a group that's doing all the selling that is not tracked by the commitment of traders, and the commitment of traders tracks the hedge funds, the index funds, and the commercials, and then it also has a category for your small trader, which is kind of your human-based trade, which is increasingly smaller in percentage of what happens. So the reason I quit following commitment of traders was it started to become information that was just not useful, and not only useful, but it was not making any sense. The market moves were not going along with the positions that were being reported by the CFTC. So for example, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I saw we had a big net short. I believe it was close to 90,000 contracts or something like short in wheat. And we had about a 30-cent rally in a week. And they considered the position almost neutral. It's like we had almost a 70, 80,000 contract move from the hedge funds with a 30-cent bounce. And typically, if they're going to move out of 80,000 contracts, you're going to see a buck, $1.30, $1.40. And so and there were a couple more fluctuations just like that. Same with corn, and maybe even a little bit in the beans. And I just thought, okay, this is becoming an unreliable tool. We're not going to follow it anymore. So that's why you don't hear a lot from me about it unless we get to an extreme position. Anyway, so this guy, the macro guy, he's writing, basically saying we're at an end of an era. We're at the end of, we've seen the dollar reverse and reverse lower pretty sharply. We lost about 12% in the index, and it varies per currency, but 12% is a sizable move, and yet we've seen no market response in our grains from it. And if it wasn't for the port fee thing, we probably would have seen an immediate demand response, but we're seeing a delayed demand response. We're just finally starting to see things come back online now. So Anyway, so his theory is that we're at an end of an era. That what we've been in was, he called it he says we're going to begin a, what did he call it, a reflationary cycle, I believe. And he thinks with the dollar dropping, these institutions that have been doing all the selling these last few years are going to be coming back in on the buy side. He says that we're going to see a major reversal. And he says the only thing that's going to prevent that, there are two things that prevent that. And that's if for some reason the Fed decides to tighten instead of loosen. If there's any kind of loosening, then that's going to put some gasoline on the upside. If they decide to tighten, if they decide to keep the rates moving higher, then that could pump the brakes. He says then we may be stuck here for 6 months. But overall, it sounded fairly promising that the odds are very well stacked that we're not going to have the numbers where more tightening is needed. And I think some of the last government numbers we've had out have suggested that. So I'll write a update on it and send you the exact publication so you can read it yourself. And it sounds promising. It just sounds like, okay, that makes sense, because the selling that we've seen is not normal. I mean, the hedge funds, they probably understood the institutional selling that was going to happen and positioned themselves for it, which explains their short position, because anybody that went short wheat, below $6 a bushel and continues to press the short, even though we're, banging on the 5s and 4s, when the cost of production is around 7, Farmgate, is just crazy. That doesn't make any sense at all. Now, it makes sense. You got your spreaders, right? You got your corn. They'll buy corn, sell wheat. You got, buy stocks, sell wheat. You got that group. They'll still use wheat because it's such a weak leg. It doesn't take that many contracts to move that market, so they continually sell wheat because that's the easy short. The important part about that, about the article, which I'll send you, is he says we're going to quickly move. He said, well, like I say, this is not a supply and demand related selling or trough that we are in. He says now we're going to move into a period of scarcity. So he must have looked at a supply and demand map, one of the balance sheet positions that I look at. He must have glanced at one of those and said, oh, okay, now we've got a problem, because we've artificially kept this market down. And we've seen that with the acreage. We had the second lowest U.S. acreage in history, lowest spring wheat acreage since 1970. You've got Canada making seeding decisions right now with not ideal soil moisture in some locations, as well as so far below the cost of production. And so you add all that together, and acreage is coming down. So, and on top of that, if we manage to keep this market down through, actually right now they're making the decision. It is not a matter of waiting. It is happening now. There's a lot of Southern Plains guys that are just going to graze it out. Why feed them expensive corn when you can just graze it out? And on top of that, you got the corn wheat spread, which is going to throw wheat in the feed channel pretty heavily. So you're going to have a big demand pull right now with the wheat for feed, and you're going to have acreage crashing down, and you're going to have a lot of acreage get turned into grazing ground. So kind of the triple whammy as far as the U.S. goes, and Canada. So anyway, point is, we've just got to somehow keep fighting the fight and somehow manage to stay in the fight. Now, I know there's a lot of bankers out there that probably, if you mention the word wheat and raising wheat, they're gonna shriek, because they think that the world's changed. They think some think the population's collapsing. I don't see any evidence of that. Yes, the Chinese are going to start moving backwards slowly, but everywhere else that matters on a demand base continues to grow the population. So unless all those are flawed data, but I'd be surprised. So anyway, we just got to keep surviving, keep hanging on, and eventually we'll get this thing turned around and if we can get our supply and demand balance sheet tight enough to where the cash market can rally on its own, at the same time that these institutions that have been selling for the last 3 years start buying, at the same time when the hedge funds need to cover, my goodness, we could have a lot of fun here. But, as far as the date that we turn, the date that these guys decide they're going to come in on the long side instead of continuing to let their position go, that's the question. Do we got to wait till fall? Is it going to happen next week? Is the low set today? I don't know. I really don't know. So weather maps still look drier than normal most places, but it's still a little bit early. We got to get some heat generated in May before anybody's going to care. Get those crops far enough along where they get into some reproductive cycles before we really going to get any probably market attention on that. So the places to watch are Europe. That northern half of the European wheat belt's dry and has been dry. Ukraine's still dry. Parts of Russia are still dry, but Russia's not hurting too bad yet. They don't have any subsoil moisture, so to speak. They're getting fed, they're getting a quarter of an inch every week. And as soon as we build some heat units, we'll probably see some stress develop there. So anyway, that's about all I know for now. So I'll get that update out email wise, and we'll go from there. Thanks.